Ichi the Killer. It looks like a crime manga. It is not. Hideo Yamamoto began serializing Ichi the Killer in 1998, right around the time Shinjuku's Kabukicho district was at peak cultural notoriety as Japan's most chaotic entertainment district. That setting is not incidental. The manga plants itself in a world where violence, vice, and hierarchy already exist in full view, and then asks what happens when the people operating inside that world are genuinely, irreparably broken. The answer is 10 volumes that got banned in several Japanese prefectures and earned a devoted cult following among readers who describe it, without irony, as one of the most hellish reading experiences the medium has ever produced. The two central figures are Ichi and Kakihara, and their dynamic is the engine of everything disturbing here. Ichi is a coward. He cries constantly, panics easily, and seems completely incapable of functioning in ordinary life. Then something triggers him, and he becomes something else entirely, a superhuman force of destruction with bladed footwear and zero hesitation. Kakihara is a Yakuza enforcer who has arrived at a very specific philosophy about what makes him feel alive, and that philosophy involves pain, his own included. He pierces, cuts, and burns himself with the calm focus of someone who has simply found their preferred hobby. The two of them are circling each other throughout the story, while a manipulative figure, known as the Old Geezer, pulls strings behind the scenes, convincing Ichi that his victims are the bullies who tormented him, turning him simultaneously into a weapon, a victim, and a pawn. The reason Ichi the Killer resonates beyond pure shock value is its strange psychological precision. It is often described by readers and critics alike as a story that offers genuine, existentialist commentary on consumerist society, while simultaneously being one of the most extreme things ever printed for commercial distribution. The ultimate sadist and the ultimate masochist, orbiting each other in a world that has no interest in redemption arcs for either of them. That is not an accident. Yamamoto is not escalating for the sake of it. He is building a mirror and daring you to look at it. Nobody comes out clean, least of all the reader who kept turning pages. The experience is graphic, relentless, and morally empty in the most deliberate way possible. If that sounds like a warning, it is, but it is also what makes the manga genuinely unhinged rather than simply unpleasant. Shamo is a different kind of disturbing. It does not announce itself. It suffocates you slowly across 33 volumes. Izo Hashimoto and Akio Tanaka began serialization in 1998, the same year as Ichi the Killer, which tells you something about what was happening in seinen manga at the turn of the millennium. But where Ichi operates in a world of Yakuza and professional violence, Shamo starts in a place most readers recognize immediately. A top student, a prestigious university track, a family home. Ryo Narushima has everything arranged correctly, and then one night, he kills both his parents with a small knife, leaving only his sister alive in the corner of the room. That is page 1. Everything after is the anatomy of what a person becomes when they have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. What follows is not a redemption arc. Ryo does not grow, evolve, or find meaning. He disintegrates, and the manga documents that disintegration with the patience of a medical examiner. He moves through the juvenile detention system, into street fighting circuits, and deeper into a version of himself that has no interest in being understood. His fighting style reflects his psychology exactly. There is nothing elegant about it. It is survivalist, ugly, and effective, built entirely around the instinct to keep going regardless of what it costs. The reason Shamo has maintained its reputation is that it functions simultaneously as a character study and a structural critique of Japanese society. The violence baked into systems of academic and professional competition, the way institutions produce people and then discard them, the pressure cooker of expectation that builds from childhood through young adulthood. Ryo is not a mystery to solve. He is what happens when that pressure cooker has no release valve. The manga earns its reputation not through shock, but through its refusal to provide a single moment of comfortable catharsis across 33 volumes of brutal fights, drug abuse, sexual violence, and relentless self-destruction. Among readers who have finished it, the prevailing sentiment is not excitement. It is a kind of stunned exhaustion. Freesia is the most deliberately confusing manga on this list, and it is confusing on purpose. Jiro Matsumoto serialized it from 2000 to 2005, and it occupies a very specific corner of the unhinged landscape. It is not interested in being shocking in a visceral, immediate sense. It is interested in making you unsure whether what you are reading is actually happening at all. The world it builds is an alternate Japan where a Vengeance Act has replaced the prison system, allowing victims' families to legally hire government-sanctioned executors to carry out sentences. The protagonist is Kano Hiroshi, a former military assassin now working as one of these vengeance proxies. He is also mentally unstable in a very specific way, compulsively repeating phrases from television, hearing telephones that do not exist, and holding extended conversations with people who are no longer alive. The art and pacing are deliberately disorienting. Matsumoto structures scenes in ways that make it genuinely difficult to know whose perspective you are in, whether a moment is real or imagined, and whether the characters you are following are reliable narrators of their own experience. That is not a flaw, it is the entire argument. Every major character is running some form of delusion alongside their waking life, and the manga refuses to provide a stable external perspective that would let you sort out what is real. The reason Freesia is worth serious attention is that it critiques state-sanctioned violence from inside the mind of someone who can barely distinguish state sanction from personal compulsion. By the end, it holds a mirror up to the audience and asks whether they could see themselves in the moral compromises of any of its characters. That question lands harder than it should. 82 chapters of moral gray zones, confusing chronology, and dark comedy that is funny in a way that immediately makes you feel strange for laughing. Among readers who have engaged with it seriously, it is often cited as a near-perfect fusion of dystopia, fractured psychology, and existentialism. It is the kind of manga you read all at once and then need to sit quietly for a while afterward. Homunculus. Hideo Yamamoto wrote this one too, which tells you something about his range and also about his consistency in choosing to make readers deeply uncomfortable. Serialized from 2003 to 2006, Homunculus arrived in a manga landscape that had plenty of psychological horror, but very little that operated at this level of internal architecture. Most psychological manga of that era was still working with external threats that produced internal consequences. Homunculus reversed the equation entirely. The threat is interior, and the external world becomes a surface onto which that interior pressure is projected. Among seinen readers who have been through the full catalog, it is frequently cited as one of the most genuinely psychedelic and disorienting reading experiences the demographic has to offer. Nakoshi is a man living in his car in a public park, existing in voluntary social limbo between the homeless community on one side and the wealthy apartment residents on the other. A medical student offers him money to undergo trepanation, a procedure that drills a hole in the skull. Nakoshi survives and begins to see people as homunculi, distorted physical representations of their inner psychological state. A woman appears as a sand sculpture. A yakuza boss appears as a child. A man's unresolved trauma manifests as something growing from his body. These visions are precise, not random. They are accurate in the way that only the most uncomfortable truths tend to be. The slow burn collapse is what makes the manga linger. Nakoshi starts using his ability to probe the psychological states of others, trying to understand and occasionally manipulate them. The deeper he goes into other people's damage, the less he can distinguish their trauma from his own. The homunculi stop being external observations and start becoming personal confrontations. The horror is not the visions themselves, it is watching a man lose the ability to find the edge of himself. Readers consistently place it among the most intelligent and memorable manga they have encountered, with more than a few describing it as a formative reading experience. That it shares an author with Ichi the Killer and yet feels entirely different is its own kind of testament. Hakaijuu, also known as Creature, is 21 volumes long. It does not waste a single page. Shingo Honda serialized it from 2014 to 2016, entering a post-Gantz, post-attack on Titan manga world that had developed a healthy appetite for large-scale creature horror. What Hakaijuu did differently was refuse to pad that premise with any of the usual softening elements. No extended training arcs, no tonal relief, no fan service diluting the dread. It delivered concentrated, purposeful horror from the first chapter and kept that register consistent all the way through. Among readers who burned through the Gantz catalog and started looking for something that scratched the same itch, Hakaijuu is consistently the first recommendation that comes up. Akira is a high school basketball player who wakes up after an earthquake to find that enormous, tentacled creatures have started attacking his school. His classmates are dissolving inside the creatures. The imagery is immediate and extreme, and the manga commits to it without apology. The Japanese title literally combines the characters for monster and the concept of expulsion, which is essentially a naming philosophy that sets accurate expectations before you have even opened the cover. What elevates Hakaijuu above pure shock value is the government conspiracy threading through the survival narrative. The creatures are not simply a natural disaster. There is something institutional being concealed about their origin and their relationship to humanity. And that knowledge bends the survival story into something more paranoid and more disturbing. The revelation that consuming the creatures may begin transforming Akira into one himself pulls the body horror inward. At 21 volumes, there is no fat here. Hakaijuu is the manga equivalent of a very short, very focused nightmare, and its brevity is a significant part of what makes it effective. Chainsaw Man. It is technically a shōnen manga. It ran in Weekly Shōnen Jump, and it is absolutely unhinged, which is perhaps the funniest and most impressive thing Tatsuki Fujimoto has ever pulled off. Serialization began in 2018, and Fujimoto arrived with a very clear creative philosophy. Build expectations carefully. then destroy them with complete conviction. Denji is one of the least aspirational protagonists in shōnen history, a poverty-stricken teenager who owes money to the Yakuza and whose motivations at the start of the story are genuinely, refreshingly small. He fuses with his pet devil Pochita and gains the ability to produce chainsaws from his body. He joins a government agency that hunts devils. His stated goal is to touch a girl's chest. That is the premise. That is what Fujimoto is working with. Then he proceeds to build a cosmology that gets stranger, darker, and more structurally ambitious the further it goes, while killing major characters without warning and using tonal whiplash as a deliberate narrative weapon. The chapter that generated the most global readership in 2024 belonged to Chainsaw Man, and the chapter in question pushed the boundaries of what the series had done even by its own standards. That is saying something, given that the series operates at a baseline level of chaos that most manga never approach. Among contemporary seinen and shōnen readers, it is broadly considered the most boundary-pushing work currently running inside a mainstream publication, which is an extraordinary distinction when you consider what Jump has historically been willing to print. The reason the series holds up beyond its reputation for extremity is Fujimoto's control. He is not being reckless. He is being precise about chaos. He lures you into caring about people, then removes them without ceremony. He makes you laugh, then places something genuinely disturbing immediately after the punchline. He builds rules for his world and then breaks them in ways that feel earned rather than arbitrary. Part 2 has expanded the cosmology further and demonstrated that Fujimoto has no intention of stabilizing into a comfortable rhythm. The experience is tonal whiplash, weaponized into an art form, and the fact that it is doing this inside one of the most historically conservative manga publications in Japan makes it somehow even more impressive. These 6 manga span 3 decades and cover enormous stylistic ground. Ichi the Killer and Shamo arrived at the end of the 90s when seinen manga was testing the outer limits of what could be distributed without intervention. Freesia and Homunculus operated in the early 2000s as more interior, psychologically precise explorations of how completely a mind can come apart. Hakaijuu and Chainsaw Man represent a newer generation that inherited all of that groundwork and found ways to push it into new structural territory. What connects all 6 is a refusal to offer the reader a stable position. None of them give you a clean hero, a clear moral lesson, or a satisfying resolution that puts everything back in order. They are all interested in the same question. What does it look like when human beings stop operating within the boundaries that usually hold them together? The answers are different every time. That is what makes this category of manga worth paying close attention to, not because it is simply extreme, but because extreme in the right hands turns out to be a surprisingly precise instrument.